Dr. Javed Gilani Sahab is the Country Director of Muslim Hands in Pakistan. And with over 25 years of experience, international experience in Asia, Europe, and Africa regions regarding program management, leadership, governance, Javed remained in grassroots to policy level working with development sector entities, humanitarian national and international partners, the UN agencies, multi and bilateral donor stakeholder making representation at appropriate platforms. He is working as an executive director, Muslim Hands, country office in Pakistan, and coordinating with team of over 2,000 with 3 regional and 10 area offices operating in 60 districts of Pakistan. Thank you very much, Javed Gilani Sahab. And then we have Mr. Bilal Taj. Bilal Taj is the acting country director of Save the Children in Pakistan, and he is representing Mr. Khurram Gondal, who is out of country, and Bilal Sahab kindly agreed to join. Mr. Bilal is a professional accountant with over 15 years of development and humanitarian response experience. While working with INGOs and audit firms, he has been able to acquire an invaluable diversified range of finance and grants management. He has majorly served as managerial level and has been part of various country office senior management teams and representing country office leadership. Thank you very much, colleagues. The topic of the today's panel discussion is to see that how civil society organizations, NGOs have contributed in the floods and what is the perspective we can see from the local community perspective. But before that, I would request Mr. Shafkat Munir with a smaller presentation, and he will be taking one of his colleagues online. STPA has recently conducted a study in Pakistan. This is going to flood in Pakistan, rethinking the humanitarian role. So that will be a very interesting findings, and a number of international NGOs were part of that study, and they have contributed on this as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shahid Kazmi Saab. Thank you, everyone on the podium, all the seniors sitting here. You can see it earlier. There was a title of the paper which we have published now. Can you see? Can you replay it? So that paper is based on our study which we have conducted in the flood hit areas. We have conducted interviews of most of you from INGOs, NGOs, and local organizations. So based on their, what they thought of, both qualitative and quantitative, we have come up with this paper, which will be presented in few minutes with you. My colleague Nigel Timmins, who is in UK now, he will be presenting the highlights of the paper. So over to you, Nigel. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes, we can. Carry on, please.
Okay, good. Great. Thank you very much. Thank you. It's a real pleasure and honor to be here this afternoon. As Dr. Shafkat said, we conducted this study, which involves some 86 informants across government, national NGOs, international NGOs, and United Nations colleagues. We also reviewed secondary data and conducted a telephone poll of 2,000 people across Sindh, Baluchistan, KPK, and the Punjab. So would you like me to, are you sharing the slides, or should I share the slides from here, Dr. Shafkat? Okay, great, thank you, yeah. Perfect, thank you. If you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So these are some headline numbers, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with already. And of course, the point to make is that behind these numbers are many, many human lives impacted against what was often a challenging situation already. And I think the focus can often be on the sudden economic loss that people suffer without recognizing the long-term impacts of such massive events. So it's still something like 240,000 people are still displaced even now in December. And the loss of key assets such as livestock, which take many years to build up and will take many years to recover. And household incomes fall, and therefore investment by those households in education or health will take a back seat for years to come. It's estimated that something like 1.1 million people will be tipped into IPC level 4 conditions next year, long after the floods have receded, against a backdrop in which there were already high levels of chronic malnutrition. And often a hidden situation, there's a big increase in levels of household debt. and that will shape the ongoing relationships between tenants and landowners for years, if not generations to come. There have been reports of increases in young marriage, which changes lives and families forever, in addition, of course, to the 1,700 people who lost their lives together. Next slide, please. So some of the key characteristics of this response were that it was nationally led, and a decision was made early on against establishing the international cluster system in fear of competing or undermining the government system, which had been invested in since the 2010 floods. Now, the feedback we received was that the national system performed differently at different levels and in different places. In our interviews, there was generally a positive reaction to the national level coordination and the role the military played in the early stages of search and rescue. Different provincial disaster management authorities were seen to perform varyingly from province to province, and district disaster management authorities were seen as having the most challenges. This is mostly a reflection of a lack of investment in the district disaster management authorities compared to other levels of government. Geographical coordination was largely seen as positive, so allocating resources to different places in need, but there were real challenges in establishing sector coordination, for example, in agreeing how to approach an issue such as shelter. And as we've seen in other crises, there was a real outpouring of solidarity from many, many Pakistanis, but it was very challenging to coordinate this spontaneous and volunteer support in a meaningful way at the ground level. The single biggest coordinated intervention was the use of the Benazir Income Support Programme in providing a one-off payment. And this was well received, but clearly more than a one-off payment is needed when we look at the extent and length of the impact. Now, beyond this national support, the amount of international support was very limited, much less than in 2010. Next slide, please. You can see there's a significant difference in the level of international assistance. The result of which, together with the use of World Bank funds to support that additional social protection payment, is effectively to rely on debt as the primary mechanism for providing financial assistance. And this throws up significant issues in the light of climate change going forward and future expected loss and damage situations, since debt is not only needed for the response, but also the recovery and then for adaptation to the future. But this risks becoming an unsustainable financial mechanism. Next slide, please. Another backdrop to the response was the reduction in humanitarian actors. Now, in part, this is because Pakistan has developed economically and humanitarian actors have prioritized other more fragile contexts. However, many respondents also pointed to years of difficult bureaucratic procedures that acted as a disincentive to humanitarian agencies, particularly international ones, but not only. Local organizations also face challenges in maintaining registration. And although the drop in numbers of actual agencies here might not look very significant, respondents told us about a drop of investment within the agencies themselves. And this undermined the standing humanitarian capacity, so that when the government asked for assistance, the capacity was not there as it had been perhaps in the past. And this might be worth reflecting on strategically for the future. Where will surge capacity be sourced to scale up? Next slide, please. I think the broad conclusion we saw was that in different contexts, including Ukraine most recently, the humanitarian system struggles to play a partnership role. Whilst it should be able to adapt to different contexts, in practice it struggles to find ways of complementing national systems and local systems, and there's a need to look at the adaptive capacity of the humanitarian system to form the right supportive role it needs to around the existing national and local systems. It needs to become much more flexible and not have a kind of binary clusters or no clusters answer. And ultimately, just to draw to a close, I think the main thing is to keep the main thing. And that means the people we mentioned at the beginning who are impacted by this huge disaster. It was striking that in surveys of people affected by flooding, when asked what the primary barrier was to them receiving assistance, they stated it was corruption. And this points to the importance of having robust accountability systems in place, both for national and international components of the humanitarian system, as ultimately our job as humanitarians is about enabling those affected by the crisis to access the support and services they need. And our strategies and our debates need to be in service of them. Next slide, please. Thank you. Yeah, so just looking forward, I think key issues will be attention, arguably has already moved on the international stage, but clearly needs to be maintained as much as possible. A single one-off payment is not enough. What are the solutions for sustained payments and sustained recovery? And how will some of the new agreements on climate finance help fund loss and damage and then recovery, and indeed build a development strategy that recognizes risk and the risk of disasters as a reality of the context rather than the occasional unexpected event? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nigel, for joining us from UK and sharing the findings of study. So before I invite the distinguished panelists and we start discussion, I would like to invite Mr. Dr. Abad Qayyum Slari sir, Executive Director STPI, and Dr. Kazim Sab, Secretary Economic Affairs Division, to please hand over the report.
Yes, and I also wanted to inform that Secretary Sab has an unscheduled meeting. So after the report, if we can take his views. I just received a message from the staff. Effort that STPI and Overseas Development Institute Humanitarian Assistance Group, we have been trying to understand the whole humanitarian paradigm, and the summary of the findings that Dr. Nigel from UK he gave. One positive message that comes very clear is that most of the response is locally funded. So that highlights the resilience in Pakistan's humanitarian response capacity and in our institutions. So the graph that you saw, the interventions, international interventions from 2010 vis-a-vis 2022, that is a clear indication of it, and also the satisfaction survey from respondents. The point that we need to bring to your attention, sir, and we hope that you will be able to take care of it. The presence of international NGOs that has gradually been diminishing due to some structural issues, due to some security clearances, and maybe due to vague this system of registration, etc. And when Dr. Nigel, when he said that foot soldiers were not there, or the number of people who could respond, agencies who could respond were not there. So that clearly shows in the context of climate change, perhaps we need to give more focus on it. We should have a transparent mechanism of filtering out whoever we feel are not abiding the law, or not conforming to law of the land, but those who are legally taking care of things and conforming to our local laws. I think we should allow them to work more smoothly. That would strengthen the efforts of government of Pakistan, the provincial governments, and that would strengthen the resilient efforts of communities. So this was my two takeaway from Dr. Nigel's presentation. I know you have to go, so of course I'll request Shahid that we can get with the benefit of presence of Secretary Saab and pick his wisdom. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abid, and especially thanks to bring some of the important issues, challenges to Secretary Economic Affairs Division. So with this, I would request now Dr. Kazim. हम चाह रहे थे कि आपसे सारे panelists बात करते and then they could bring their point of view and we could hear you. But since you have scheduled to a meeting, so I would request you please to share some of the your insights and the point of view, how the government of Pakistan, especially Economic Affairs Division, being a centralized department who is coordinating internationally, how the floods affected population needs in terms of, although we have a lot of advocacy and negotiation with the global community, global governments on the climate justice agenda, how that is met. And second, we would like to hear from you, how do you see the role of international organizations, NGOs, and specifically in the point which Dr. Abid mentioned, how that can be overcome. And I can tell you, representing this INGO community, within the recent floods, INGOs in Pakistan, our members, approximately 42 organizations, they have almost contributed 120 million plus US dollars response until now, and they are on the forefront. But there's a lot of support being provided by the government of Pakistan. The issues and challenges are not the same which were in the past, but there are a lot of issues which are minor issues related to the time limitations. So I would request you, please, if you can enlighten on those topics as well, that will benefit to this panel and audience. Thank you so much.
You want me to do it from here? Abid Saab, all the distinguished panelists sitting here, and yourself, I mean, it is indeed a matter of great honor and pleasure for me to be attending this forum. I had actually planned it differently, you know, and wanted to spend the entire budgeted time here, but you know, things, we are in an emergency mode, you know, and the schedules keep on changing. Listened with great interest to the presentation, and of course, you know, it is the result of a lot of intellectual effort. So some of the findings, you know, were very interesting, and I want to congratulate you on conducting a very deep assessment of the situation and coming up with some very insightful conclusions. All right, so I mean, without actually repeating the numbers, let me acknowledge that it was a devastation which was beyond expectations, and it was different in terms of its impact from the other similar catastrophes of the past. There was no riverine flooding. Yes, we had previous warnings that the monsoon would be 40% above normal. It was not 40%. At certain places, it was 700%, you know, and it was not anticipated. The magnitude, at least, was not anticipated. The second important aspect, which we often not really focus upon, is that it was not riverine flooding, and it was, again, the pattern was different, although it was followed by riverine flooding also. Again, there was a spatial shift, and it was not the north, you know, which bore the brunt, but it was rather the south, you know, and the stagnant waters which were creating greater problems for us. It impacted 84 districts. I mean, it is the size which is perhaps bigger than many European countries. So just sheerly in its impact, in its magnitude, in its nature, it was a challenge, you know, which was difficult for any single entity to face up to. Of course, such situations demand synergy of action and forming of alliances and coalitions. And this is, of course, what we try to do also. In terms of coordination, what was not mentioned was that the government generally followed, what actually succeeded for COVID. And we had a national coordination forum where all the provinces were represented and all the federal agencies were also represented. So that provided a ready center to quickly respond to the emerging needs, because the situation was rapidly changing. And I'm talking of the National Flood Coordination and Response Center. Again, very rightly pointed out that in the rescue phase, it was the civil organizations, but it was the military also which came up with a rapid and quick response. Having said that, I think that we are still in the relief phase. There is no clear-cut demarcation of these phases. So while you might actually be transitioning to rehabilitation and reconstruction, it doesn't mean that the challenges of the rescue phase have been overcome or are over. So there are still issues, of the relief stage. The government also provided cash transfers, as was rightly pointed out. We knew that it was not enough, but this was a rapid response that we could manage, and it was done. Now, as far as the Economic Affairs Division is concerned, what were the options available to us and how did we do it? So, having learned from the past experiences, rather than processing new projects, one immediate thing which was available to us was repurposing the existing projects and making available response packages that could rapidly be put into action in all the provinces. So with the help of our major development partners, particularly the World Bank and Asian Development Bank, and also the bilaterals, we repurposed funds and made changes within the structure of existing projects to rapidly respond to the requirements. That, of course, is a difficult call to make, because if you are taking funds away from your regular programs, there is a development cost associated to that, so it was it was a delicate call to take funds out of the regular programs and repurpose those programs, because every program is designed to and designed to achieve certain objectives. So it has a cost of its own. Yet it was done. And then in the current international scenario, again, very rightly pointed out in the study, it is difficult to leverage international financing. There are competing needs. There would also always be competing needs. And in that competitive external environment, we try to leverage as much external additional financing as possible, other than leveraging the existing project portfolio that we had. Now for the reconstruction phase, while still responding to the relief, we would be going with the United Nations, and we are planning a pledging conference in Geneva in the second week, perhaps around the 9th of January 2023, in which we would like to have all the entrusted IFIs, the donor community, the international organizations, and governments to participate in that and help us, and we followed the same pattern as we did, when we were confronted with a similar challenge in 2005 and 2010. Now, the post-disaster need assessment also, we have not reinvented the wheel. So we worked with the development partners. It was a process, of course, led by the government, but it had the active involvement of all the UN agencies as well as the IFIs, and everyone who wanted to be a part of the exercise was provided the opportunity to work with the government. And there at one point in time were about 100 international consultants working with the various government agencies. Of course, the primary data was provided by the government agencies, both federal as well as provincial. The planning division is having the lead from the government side on the entire exercise, and it is in the process of developing recovery strategies which will be neatly split sectorally, and it would identify now, the need which has already come out of the post-disaster need assessment sector-wise and projectized also, which would be presented on the occasion of the pledging conference, for want of a better word. As a matter of fact, maybe if there is some suggestion, how we want to name the forum, would welcome that. So that is generally where we stand. Now, the role of the civil society, the local indigenous philanthropy cannot be overemphasized. I am of the firm belief, and having had, some years in the field experience also, no single entity can do it alone. I mean, when you are confronted with the catastrophe at this level and of this magnitude, you need to form alliances and work together. There are several reasons, why perhaps the response this time was lacking. Abid Saab has very candidly and vividly pointed out that things, are moving in the right direction. I would just share with you the things, which are in my domain. The international NGOs are dealt with by the Interior Division, as we all know. So what I can do is that I'll definitely share. Abid, of course, is a very dear friend also. So we've worked together, and we will talk to them and see, how we can further facilitate the process and make it more friendly, to the partner organizations to work with. As far as the local organizations receiving foreign funding is concerned, the much awaited policy, which was in limbo, has finally been approved by the cabinet. It has been gazette notified. It is available. Some of the cardinal features of it is that there is an outer limit in which the applications will be processed, and an attempt has been made to make it as transparent and user-friendly as possible. So hopefully that will resolve some of the issues of the local organizations accessing foreign funding. But the international NGOs and the framework in which they work is within here, but we can talk to them, and definitely I'll take the message from this forum. Finally, I know that, the proper way would have been to sit the entire session and engage with you, and that would have given me a very fair insight and helped me in my work. But some of my colleagues, would be sitting the session, and they would definitely let me know, how it progressed. And believe me, I take these fora very seriously. So the recommendations that would come, we would like to work on those. I'm of the very firm belief that generally there is a missing link between the academia, the research, and the private sector, plus the non-government and the civil society organizations and the policy formulation. So we will definitely work very closely with SDPI to bridge that gap and incorporate the feedback that we receive to the extent possible and make it a part of the policy formulation process and reflected, in the various things that we would be doing in our official spheres. In that regard, I mean, fora like these, the importance of these forums cannot be overemphasized. I would like to congratulate the organizers of this forum for such excellent participation, presentation, and I'm sure, that you will be coming up with consolidated recommendations also, which we can work together, to implement in order to further improve, the performance in the various spheres. One important feature, perhaps, which I failed to mention, was that there was complete ownership by the government, and the kind of follow-up on the floods that actually was happening, right from the top to the bottom, was exactly what was required and the need, and it was everywhere. And I think we just need to continue working with the same zeal and the same spirit, right from the top to the bottom to respond to the emergency, which still has many challenges that require response. I would once again like to thank you very much for providing me this opportunity and assure you, Abed, your organization, your colleagues, of my strongest support in this whole process. Thank you.
Before you leave, may I request the requested respected panelists for a group photo with Dr. Kazim, please.
It will be a pleasure. Sorry for all the disruption.
So with this, we can formally start our discussion. Maybe we can use bilingual Urdu or English. हमारी ज़्यादा audience जो है वो local है. So maybe I can start from the very right, Dr. Farah. Dr. Farah was most recently, she was in the field, Balochistan, Sindh. Then she was in the COP, very actively participating in the COP. So Dr. Farah, my first question to you is, how do you see, as Secretary Saab was also mentioning, that there are very much dire needs, and this all suddenly happened, this climate catastrophe in Pakistan, floods. What do you think the needs of the communities? Usually we see from the reports from different organizations, donors, that these are reports. So do you think there are few needs which are unmet or which not projected? And then what do you see how the global community has behaved to this climate catastrophe, when we had advocated a lot on climate justice? And maybe you can talk or quote some examples from the COP27 as well. So over to you, Dr. Farah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shahid, and it's really nice to be here. I was hoping to be in better health for today's conversation, but this is how it is. I think, first of all, the report that has been launched at the beginning of today's session, it has provided an excellent kind of an overall, an overview of how the response has been this time around, because floods are, we know that floods happen in Pakistan, they're nothing new. But we also know that this time the scale and the magnitude of the disaster was much, much bigger than anything we had seen before. And in the report that we saw in the beginning, we also saw that compared to the scale and magnitude of the floods, the amount of funding that has been mobilized to respond to the floods compared to 2010 is very, very small. It's very, very small. And I think this is one important thing to remember. The disaster that has happened in the country is a climate-driven disaster. It is unprecedented. It has impacted a huge, huge population and a huge geographical area. And this is not something that has happened now. And a certain number of people, or we know that 6.5 million people were affected, displaced. So they have been affected now. This is something that is going to have its impact felt for a very, very long time, not just for the people who are directly impacted by the floods, but overall for the country and its development. In terms of the needs, one thing to remember is that there are needs that are ongoing, and then there are needs that are evolving. And when we see that for a certain period of time, the issue of floods has been highlighted in the media, especially national media, and you get to hear about what has happened in different parts of the country. And when it is not there anymore, it does not mean that the issue has gone away or the needs have gone away. It's really, really important that the evolving needs of these people who have been impacted so badly by the floods continue to remain a focus of our discussions in the media, but also in our work. The third thing that I would like to say is that the first two things that I said, that the funding compared to the magnitude of the disaster is very small. The second thing, that the needs are continuing and new needs are evolving. To give you an example, winter has started. There is still a huge population which is without shelter, whose houses are damaged. They are close to where their houses are, but they're not with a roof on their heads. And I'll later, and I think my colleagues here as well later, talk about other needs as well. So the needs are continuing. So the funding is small, the needs are continuing and evolving. So who is, thank you very much. Thank you. It's okay. Who's bearing the cost? This is a question that we need to ask ourselves. If the needs are there and the money is not there to fulfill those needs, who's bearing the cost? And the answer to that is that it is the affected people. It is the people who have lost their houses and their livelihoods and their safety, probably their future, are the ones who are bearing the cost. This is a major thing that we need to think about and consider as we respond to the needs of these populations. There are many areas. I'll very briefly, I don't know how many minutes I've got, but I'll very briefly, I still have 2 minutes, so I want to touch upon the COP27 as well. This was mentioned in the conclusion of the report as well, how the climate finance will come into play to support Pakistan and Pakistani people who have been affected by the floods. This is a big one. This remained a big topic in COP27. I think for a long time, for majority of those 2 weeks, people who were in the decision-making places probably could not really figure out the temperature in the pavilion, because the temperature was really high. The activism was very palpable, and people wanted a concrete decision with regards to loss and damage finance facility, which is why till the end of those 2 weeks, no decision had taken place, and then things had to change in the last moments. And finally, the least this COP has come up with is a decision on a loss and damage facility. But I've said this before, and I'm just repeating myself, that the real work has to happen now. That is one decision that has been made, but we still don't know how far that facility is, how far we are from getting any benefit from that facility, where the funding is going to come from, how the countries will access that funding, how the countries, especially like Pakistan, will access this funding. We also know that in terms of adaptation and mitigation as well, the targets are never met. Pakistan has in the past as well received very little climate adaptation financing. So these things are very relevant for Pakistan now. I keep going back to the report because that's how this session started, and I was listening to it very carefully. It specifically talked about the funding that's coming. Is it grants or is it loans? And even for example, for climate adaptation, the advocacy always is that it should be grants, not loans. However, in case of Pakistan, for example, for the recovery needs and the rehabilitation needs, we know that little grant money probably will come for that. And Secretary Saab also mentioned World Bank and ADB and the government of Pakistan, who will lead the rehabilitation process. One last point about recovery and rehabilitation, and and about humanitarian organizations. We are present on the ground. The international NGOs and our partner local NGOs, we are present on the ground. We identify the needs, we work with those communities, we know what they need. We try to get funding to meet those needs. And right now we are meeting their basic needs for clean drinking water, for cash, for hand washing, hygiene, health, nutrition, some protection, those kind of needs. But right now, the communities need help in rebuilding their houses. They need help in rebuilding their lives, restoring their livelihoods, restoring their safety. Children have to go back to schools safely. This is where I think we need to work together, all of the humanitarian organizations, excuse me, to make sure that we're able to mobilize funding for recovery as soon as possible. Thank you, Shahid.
Thank you, Dr. Farah, and for making this to the event today. So, going forward, one of our colleagues from EAD, Samar Hassan Saiba, she is the Senior Joint Secretary at Economic Affairs Division. May I request you please to fill in the seat of Secretary Sahab at the stage. So I will, my next question to Dr. Ehtisham Anwar. Dr. Sahab, having a diversified background from the management and specifically now as a Secretary Education, South Punjab was also affected from the recent floods. So my question to you is, keeping in view the preparedness, as a larger preparedness we have to combat with these kind of situations, and specifically, what do you see the education sector and especially children, although we will hear some of the real stories or real issues from say the children as well, but what is your perspective, how the government is taking and kind of a policy recommendation you wanted to give from this conference that can be taken forward to protect the rights of the children specifically from in these situations and specifically their education in emergencies. Over to you, Dr. Chia.
Thank you, Mr. Kazmi. Thank you, STPI, for having invited me over to this August forum. In my opinion, I shall be speaking at the last. For the reason being, I'll be attending to the last part of the entire conversation. What next? So if you could, yes, I'll wait till the end. So you can probably take comments from any other colleague. Then I'll be speaking that what we are doing to prevent such an occurrence in future. Sure. Yeah, thank you.
So maybe I will come back to you with a number of policy recommendations we will have from different panelists. My next, Asif Shirazi Sahab, Country Director, Islamic Relief. How do you see the role of international NGOs or NGOs they have contributed in this flood? And if you wanted to add some of the needs of the communities, you have been very active in the field, and specifically on the point which Dr. Farah mentioned, that when the international media has projected the needs of Pakistan floods, there was support, and then since the media is not exactly doing the same now, might be the time has been left. So what are your overall thoughts from this recent experience of floods? And you can quote some of the lesson learned from Islamic Relief response as well, and then also how the overall humanitarian community, INGOs, were able to respond to the situation.
This mic is not working. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you very much, Kazmi Sahab, for giving me a chance. Actually, your question is having many questions, and I'm trying to organize how to reply on all these things. I joined Islamic Relief Pakistan as country director on 1st August, and the flood was already occurring in Balochistan, and in the communities where the organization was working, we were getting the information about the devastation of the floods, And all those areas were not a monsoon areas or riverine areas, especially Balochistan areas. So it was a flash flood, and but it was not highlighted anywhere on any media, even on the national media. But the prediction, as well as all the opinion of the experienced people was that it's going to be something very big. So at that time, media was not there, and when we were talking with the peer international organizations, that what are the plans, and everyone was saying that there is a very less appetite in terms of funding, either the appeals in UK or USA or Canada, wherever we have the fundraising offices. And then the other factor was also the one of the appeal that really helped in the you can say that in highlighting these type of situation is Disaster Emergency Committee, DEC appeal in UK. And when we were asking the member agencies of DEC to ask their offices to influence DEC, we were hearing that there is a less appetite. Why less appetite? Because the flood was not highlighted. Unfortunately, the situation remained the same until we all saw that big hotel in Kalam, I think Honeymoon Hotel, which was washed away from River Sawat. And then a big media news came out. And that was, I think, on 26th or 25th of August, and 28th August, Pakistan launched the first appeal. And when we were talking with the UN and the big humanitarian actors, I'm not talking about the government, because it's very easy to criticize government in this situation, that it's their responsibility. They are the one who are responsible, and we have done as an international community, we have built their enough capacity, and they are now capacitated. So when we were talking with the international community, they were saying that government of Pakistan has not launched an appeal. So the government of Pakistan launched an appeal, but that appeal was on a very bad guesstimates, $160 million on 28th of August. And then some media attention on BBC and the international media. So we saw that some talk about the flood has started in Pakistan. The flood started in July, or you can say that in mid of July or in beginning of August, but the world woke up in end of August or beginning of September, and the world woke up just for a very short window. And one of the main thing that was coming from everyone, though, like you have said, to bring a local perspective was that 2 million houses damaged, 1,700 people died, 4 million acre land is in the water, a big number of the livestock, it has perished. That's the local context. And the other local context is that so far, after 4 months, after 3 months of the response, still 25% people have got the humanitarian aid. So that is the situation on the ground. So when we talked about the big players, or all the players, they were saying is that first excuse was that government did not launch appeal, funding is not possible. Ukraine crisis is there is a donor fatigue, there is a crisis at home, the bilateral donors. And then the result was that the funding was not channelized. And we all actually, the reality which I have observed in this flood, that if the funding is not there, nothing can be done. So even the fundraising people in our back offices, we also had an argument with them, is that funding, are you a fundraiser or fund collectors? So if the disaster is not on the media, so it means that it's not possible to create awareness of the disaster. So with the support of some of the humanitarians actually who were left in the country as well as abroad, at least some speed and scale was maintained in the early weeks. And but what I have seen, what I have observed, that the whole humanitarian machine or humanitarian vehicle, response vehicle in Pakistan did not start early, because in last 12 years, we did not have a experience of a mega emergency. So I'm not sure that where all the humanitarian capacity has gone. Maybe we are good, or we are good in like talking many things, soft components. We know that's a climate change. We need to build resilience. All these things are important. But now, when the flood has happened with the millions of people in need, the responders or the humanitarians, we did not see them as we saw them in 2010 or we saw them in 2005. So mainly what we are seeing is that, okay, funding is not available, but what the humanitarians or the humanitarian organizations have done to create the awareness. Are we also waiting for the awareness from the media? If the media will create, we will. So what's our role? So that's something which was a different thing in this emergency. And then, like I mentioned, that only 20 to 25% people have been reached. Normally, we have a cycle of response and then recovery and then rehabilitation, reconstruction, whatever. But as Secretary Saab mentioned, that there is so much mix and match, areas were different, as well as many people are still in need of humanitarian assistance, and the recovery is slow. So if the response is slow, recovery is slow. So we are not sure that how this challenge will be tackled. Of course, we talk in COP27 on the negative impact of the floods or the climate change on Pakistan as a result of these floods. But when this damage and loss fund has been established, someone was telling me, I'm not expert on climate change, that maybe Pakistan is not eligible to get those funding, that can't access that fund. I'm not sure on that. Maybe Farah can correct me, she was there. And then another thing which I have observed, like in this scale of the emergency, you need all the organizations, all the humanitarian actors need to do a scale up. And in scale up, you cannot do a business as usual. So even the humanitarian actors, everyone, maybe they have forgot how to deal this size of the emergency. So everyone, I'm not saying we all actually, we tried to respond this mega disaster through business as usual approach. And this business as usual approach has not worked. Even the civil society, local civil society organizations, international humanitarian community, and sorry to say also donors. So all these factors actually, they combine, and we have seen that the things are slow. And I don't think that the things will be very fast, very quickly. I had meeting this week with some of the high government officials as well as some of the ambassadors also. And then we are saying is that there's going to have a appeal donor conference in Geneva on 9th of January. But no one is very much hopeful for the amount or the what will be raised. So I think the best thing is that first let's try to do the actual response, reaching to the people, cover their need. And as Farah said, is that the disaster is not over, need is still huge on the ground. So we all need to keep this momentum. If the momentum is not on the media, as humanitarians, it's our responsibility to keep the momentum. So it's not only a job of one INGO or 2 or 3 INGO, it's a collective effort. So I'm stopping here, Shahid Saab. I don't know whether I answered your question or not.
Thank you, Asif. You have answered a major part of my question. So moving forward, Javed Gilani Saab, although we have now the context, the needs we heard from our panelists. My question from you is, how can the government and international agencies help in dealing with some of these challenges? What are your recommendations, how international organizations, NGOs and government can work more in a collaborative way, how we can learn together from these challenges which we are facing, and we can prepare ourselves very better in the future?
Thank you, Shahid Bhai, and thank you, SDPI and PHF for providing this opportunity. I would go, because I was sleeping, thank you for the cup of tea. So, uh, no, I would go taking a positive aspect of it and seeing the impact being created by the international INGOs where we are representing here at the stage, like Brother Arshad Shirazi said, that although we have a lot of challenges, but within that we have a lot of good things to see. And when I see the impact being created up till now, because of all these challenges we've been facing with regards to funding, with regards to the not creating that kind of impact, the scale we have seen in this disaster. So I am in this sector from last 30 years. So I have never seen a disaster of this scale in this country or anywhere else in the world. So one thing is that we need to have a continuous commitment for that. And for that reason, we mentioned at each and every forum that until and unless we make this, agenda alive at the national and most importantly at the international media, we are not going to attract the direction and attention of the donor community. The reason behind is you see across the globe multiple disaster. Go to different countries, you will see different. So if that is not there in the media, you are not going to receive that kind of a response in that. One thing is that. Secondly, when we promote Pakistan and when we see more than 4 million people being facilitated by the actors, the PHF members, 42 INGOs, some of them they have reached to more, some of them have reached to less, but obviously it's a collective effort. And when we see our role as INGO, as civil society, it's shouldering the efforts of the government. And we have seen it's increasing the buy-in and the acceptance of the civil society organization and INGOs especially, when they see our work, when they see our people, our teams helping them at the ground level. And tremendous job up till now, although the need is huge. And my recommendations would be, it's almost 5 months. We are now entering into early recovery. But when we see the challenge, as Brother Shirazi already mentioned, you're seeing 2 million people, they're waiting for housing. So, but when we see the level of funding and appetite against that, we see a very less percentage of that. And why we are pleading for Pakistan, not that we are Pakistani, but because we are humanitarian. Even this scale of disaster happen anywhere in the world, we would be saying the same. But see, on one side, we are contributing less than 1% of the carbon emission to the whole of the world. And we are among the top 5, affected country by this climate at this point of time. So I would say the international community must have come and see the situation. And when you see 33 million people, when you see more than 83 districts being affected, when you 3 out of this 40 district almost, they're in the red zone. And we still see water has not been receded completely in some part of the Sindh. And on the other side, you see winter is coming. It is below zero. We have to save the life of the people. So I would say a good bit done by the civil society. And one thing which, and on the other side, lot to be done by us and by the government and by the international community to reach to all these affected people and to help them in this difficult time, situation and time, especially moving from the emergencies to the early recovery and rehabilitation and reconstruction phase. And one thing I would see, we don't want to invent the new things. So I'm coming up with my experience. When we went to any area, people, they are very welcoming. Community in this condition, they are very welcoming. Have you seen any management at any stage? No. Our people, they are very, the communities, they are very collaborative. They are very cooperative. The way we wanted to be there, as a civil, as a humanitarian, we need to think about and how we can help them more. Even a good word can make a huge difference. But how to act upon and how to go collectively and how to make this more effective is literally, I see a challenge. But positive side is there are many actors sitting across the table, and also a lot of organizations do a wonderful job. And I would see my first recommendation for the government of Pakistan is we need to come up with a policy to not to allow the people to construct homes, near the river banks. So you will see another disaster in the coming days and time. And another is to propagate the case of Pakistan and climate justice financing against the international community. And the third thing is, I would, because Secretary of Education is sitting here, we want to see on the government side and also on the civil society side, the climate integrated programming. Until and unless we don't have climate integrated programming, we are not going to give our generation, future generation, a Pakistan free of disaster, literally. So I would say, why not to come up with a curricula which is there, environment is inculcated from the grassroots level to upper level, so that we prepare our generation to see how we can combat this issue, which is actually creating, the mass destruction across the country. Thank you.
Javed Gilani sir, we have almost 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes left, so we will try to conclude our discussion. From this panel, my last guest speaker, Mr. Bilal, my question, Save the Children is specialized organization dealing with the children's, and do you want to highlight some of the needs which children are facing or challenges, and then maybe you can put some of the policy recommendation that how we can cater the needs of the children education and emergencies, specifically like in the COVID, a lot of you can say the time in the rural areas, the children, they were out of school, and then suddenly it came another flood. So how do you see how children are coping up with this, and what support has been provided to them?
So first of all, thank you for hosting, and thank you to SDPI as well. I would try to build on the discussions that we had from the other panel members, i.e. needs and the damages. So we say the population, the affected population is 33 million, right? When it comes to impact on children, you can just think about it from the number of affected children, which are over 50% of this population. Now, children is our future, right? And when it comes to like what is the impact of this emergency on them, I was coordinating with some of the stakeholders from government and local representatives just recently. Alone in Sindh, we are talking about over 600 schools being either partially damaged or fully damaged. The children, they are homeless. So we are talking about shelter for community, but thinking about that is not the only need they have. It's about when they're back to their homes, how they would go to schools, a big question mark for all of us. Also, being exposed to these emergencies, one after the other, like you mentioned, COVID first, and then immediately after that, they were not able to go to schools even during the COVID times, and immediately after that flood, with the schools being damaged, The biggest challenge is how we will bring them back to a school. The biggest challenge is how we would provide them with the psychosocial support because they are in trauma. The biggest question is how we will provide them with the facilities where they can go play, and then at the end in future can contribute back to the community. So all those are big question marks for all of us, being it a civil society organization on the ground level, being it the international organization sitting in the capital, or being it government or other agencies working over it. Fundraising being challenged, we all have faced across the board, right? And we, as Save the Children, when we started responding to this emergency response, we were completely aware about that this would going to be a big challenge for us. Reason being, there are emergencies that are taking place globally, one after the other. So the donor focus is one of the biggest thing. Secondly, we do understand climate injustice as well. It at the end is something which is really having an impact on Pakistan in particular, producing less than 1% of the carbon emission, but still among the major country being affected from the climate change disaster. So that also have an impact on the fundraising. So we need to find solutions which can help us. Sorry, I'm talking about funding a lot because I'm a finance background person, so I will be really focusing on this topic because this was really a challenge when it comes to this emergency. So we have to come up with a solution that is sustainable for this community, for this nation. And what we have seen at the start of the response, what happened is, if you can see, and all of us can agree on it, is that our community at the individual level, they were strong enough. They were kind of like really willing to contribute, and they contributed a lot, right? The problem came in when it comes to our capacity to take that individual contributions to the level where the communities are. So that's one thing. Secondly, the other important factor is, did we as different stakeholders, did we look into how we can address the fundraising challenge in a different way? So for example, did we try to explore our own communities for it, or did we try to explore for raising funds with Pakistani diaspora that are sitting outside the country? And then at the end, what can we contribute in terms of like building the capacity of the civil society organizations, where they can take those individual contributions and use them for the benefit of the community there on the ground. So I think so that is something which we as international organization has really looked into it, and we were somehow able to not to overcome the challenge, but still were able to address it in a little way. So that's one aspect of it. So we have to look for innovative solutions. Again, at the response side, what we can see is, I mean, in the first phase of the response, we understand we have to provide the immediate relief to the beneficiaries, whether those are children or households. So they're basic needs. But then we need to think about it as how can we bring in corporate organizations as part of their CSR responsibility. How can we work with them together, where they can join hands with us, and we can give the community sort of solutions which are sustainable. So I can quote a few examples. We are working with a couple of corporate partners at this point of time, where we are really looking into kind of like model solutions that we say, being it a model village, being it a model school, being it a model shelter, etc. So we are working with the corporates where they can contribute as part of their CSR, corporate social responsibility, and where we can bring our expertise as international organizations, and together we deliver to the communities in a way that is sustainable for future. So, i.e., preparing them. What had happened. Now we have to respond to it. One, but then at the same time we have to make our communities ready for, so that in the future they are in a position that they are not looking for us to reach there, but they are in a position where they can respond. They can immediately respond to the crisis themselves as well. So we have seen there are lots of investment that has been made in terms of like preparedness. That was done at the provincial level or at the national level, or even at the organizational levels as well. But then we need to take this initiative of preparedness and we need to take it down to the ground level where we can prepare our communities. One perfect example that we can quote from this flood response is, if you look into KP, even when we were expecting that there would be lots of damage towards the end, what happened is they were able to evacuate very quickly. So which clearly indicates that they were a little bit better prepared for that. So this is something which we need to work on when we are working with the communities. For children in particular, Save the Children is at the moment trying to come up with an integrated approach where we can have where we can bring back children back to school, and at the same time can provide them with other services that are necessary, i.e. clean drinking water, health and hygiene, and as well as at the same time providing them with the playing facilities as well. Yeah. So I think the need is quite a lot. We have to work together. And I would echo the positives that my colleague has mentioned in terms of like the collaboration between government, international organizations and local organizations. But the coordination element is where we need to improve further, and this can be further explored. Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you, Bilal. So with this, I will come to Dr. Shyam now. And before I ask to Dr. Shyam, dear audience, if you have any question, so you can note down the question from the panelists. So after Dr. Shyam, we will open the floor for the questions as well. So over to you, Dr. Shyam. You have already listened all of them, and we would love to hear from you the perspective from the education department side, collaborations and the future preparedness, how we can be more active, more responsive, and we can learn from these experiences.
Thank you, Kazmi Saab, and thank you, audience. आप लोग आई इमेजिन के अब तक बहुत बोर हो चुके होंगे. हम लोग कन्वर्सेशन कर रहे हैं, लेकिन प्रॉबेबली क्योंकि ये जरा ड्राई कन्वर्सेशन होती है तो बोरियत एक लाजमी अमर है. लेकिन अब टुवर्ड्स द एंड हमें आपकी तवज्जो चाहिए होगी, क्योंकि सारी बातें अपने क्लाइमेक्स की तरफ जा रही हैं. तो जो हमारा टेक अवे होगा वो आखिर में मर्ज करेगा हमारी कन्वर्सेशन के. तो आई वुड रिक्वेस्ट कि आप लोग थोड़ी सी टेंशन दीजिएगा. जब भी ऐसा कुछ होता है, whenever we hear of floods, devastating floods, there are some R's जो हम बहुत सुनते हैं: rescue, relief, reconstruction, response, recovery, rehabilitation. What we don't hear is resentment, repulsion, अफसोस कि ये क्यों हो गया. अगर हम रिसेंटमेंट और रिपल्शन नहीं करेंगे तो माय डियर ऑडियंस, 2010 का आपने ग्राफ देखा, 2022 का देखा, कुछ अरसे बाद हम यहाँ बैठ के 2030 का, 2028 का, 2035 का ग्राफ देख रहे होंगे. तो जो होना था सो हो गया. इसको भी अच्छे तरीके से रिस्पॉन्ड करना है. लेकिन हम टेकिंग अ लीव फ्रॉम हियर, हमें यहाँ से आगे जाना है. हमें बैठ के अब ये भी सोचना है, अपनी कन्वर्सेशन में, अपनी पार्लेंस में भी ये भी लेके आना है कि हुआ क्या जिसकी वजह से ये होता रहा. अभी हम सुन रहे हैं वी आर गोइंग टू अरेंज अनदर इंटरनेशनल डोनर्स कॉन्फ्रेंस. अगेन आई एम गोइंग टू माय डियर ऑडियंस, कभी आपने सोचा ये इंटरनेशनल डोनर कॉन्फ्रेंस क्या होती है? एक हो चुकी है, दोबारा होने लगी है। आपके नाम पे, मेरे नाम पे दुनिया भर में जाके फंड्स मांगे जाते हैं। आप इसको जरा इंटरनलाइज कीजिए, अपने इसकी पर्सोनिफिकेशन में जाइए। तो कम से कम मेरे लिए बतौर एक पाकिस्तानी, एक सिंसियर पाकिस्तानी, एक पैट्रियाटिक पाकिस्तानी, ये बड़ी तकलीफ दे बात है कि हमारे नाम पे हमारे लोगों को जाना पड़ता है और दुनिया से पैसे मांगने पड़ते हैं। तो क्यों ना कुछ ऐसा करना शुरू कर दें कि आइंदा ये सिचुएशन ना आए। तो यहाँ से वो हमारा काम इमर्ज करता है। मेरे दोस्त ने कहा कि एजुकेशन को कोई तैयार कर ले। तो जनाब अगर हम इस तरफ आए तो मैं एक रिपोर्ट देख रहा था, ये यूनेस्को की रिपोर्ट है, गेटिंग एवरी स्कूल क्लाइमेट रेडी, गेटिंग एवरी स्कूल क्लाइमेट रेडी। और ये बताती है, मैं बड़ा हैरान हुआ, और ये कहती है दुनिया के बारे में कि नियरली हाफ ऑफ द कंट्रीज हैड नो रेफरेंस टू क्लाइमेट चेंज इन देयर करिकुलम। दुनिया के आधे मुल्कों में तो क्लाइमेट चेंज का जिक्र ही नहीं है, और बाकी हाफ जो रह गए, द डेप्थ ऑफ इंक्लूजन वाज यूजुअली वेरी मिनिमल, बहुत थोड़ा सा मेंशन किया जाता है उनके यहाँ। अच्छा, अब साथ से एक और बात जुड़ गई है, एक नया, आप क्लाइमेट चेंज तो सुन ही रहे थे, you're gonna hear a new term now, क्लाइमेट जस्टिस। आपने सुनना शुरू कर दिया होगा, और ये आने वाले दिनों में इसके बारे में आप ज्यादा सुनते चले जाएंगे। अब क्लाइमेट जस्टिस क्या है? क्लाइमेट जस्टिस ये है कि हम ये कह रहे हैं कि पाकिस्तान का कंट्रीब्यूशन तो लेस देन 1% है इन एमिशन ऑफ कार्बन गैसेस, लेकिन पाकिस्तान इज, एज वन ऑफ द कलीग्स सेड, 5th मोस्ट अफेक्टेड कंट्री। तो समवन समवेयर एल्स शुड बिहेव, क्योंकि पाकिस्तान में लोगों को जाने देना पड़ती है, हमारी प्रॉपर्टी, हमारी लाइफ स्टॉक, एवरीथिंग डिस्ट्रॉयज। लेकिन आप मुझे ये बताइए कि जब आप लोग जा रहे हैं, दुनिया को कह रहे हैं कि क्लाइमेट जस्टिस, आप बिहेव भी करें और कंट्रीब्यूट भी करें, तो वो पलट के पूछेंगे आपसे, ठीक है हम अपनी एमिशंस भी कम करते हैं, अवेयरनेस भी फैलाते हैं, एडवोकेसी भी लेके आते हैं, लेकिन आप लोग खुद क्या कर रहे हैं? क्या आप ऐसा करते हैं जो हमें कह रहे हैं? तो जनाब आपका आर्गुमेंट वहां पे वीक हो जाता है। आज मैं देख रहा था, लाहौर पाकिस्तान में और दुनिया भर में आज सबसे आलूदा शहर है, 3rd डे इन अ रो। तो आप जाके क्लाइमेट जस्टिस की बात कर रहे हैं, वो आपसे कहेंगे अपना लाहौर तो साफ कर लो, बाद में हमें आके बताना ना कि हम कंट्रीब्यूट कितना कर रहे हैं। तो पूरी की पूरी कौम को थोड़ा सा अपने रवैये की तरफ भी देखने की जरूरत है। वहां पे जिस तरह मैंने अर्ज किया कि हमने अब अगली जो हमने गलती की वो तो हो गई, अब अगली जनरेशन को, आपको और जो नेक्स्ट जनरेशन है उन्हें तैयार करना है कि उनके जमाने में इस तरह का फ्लड ना आए। तो जनाब इसके लिए जब हमने सुना, सोचा, समझा, तो हमें पता चला कि चले नई जनरेशन को एजुकेट करें, 10-15 साल में शायद कुछ रिजल्ट्स आ जाएं। 2010 के सैलाब में अगर किसी ने इस तरह से सोचा होता तो 2022 में शायद इतनी तबाही ना होती। तो चलें आज सोचना शुरू करते हैं। वहां से ये बात इमर्ज की, हमने पढ़ना, सुनना, देखना शुरू किया, तो पता चला दुनिया में क्लाइमेट चेंज किसी जगह, किसी मुल्क में स्कूलों में बच्चों को नहीं पढ़ाई जाती, किसी जगह पे भी। हाँ, इसके टॉपिक्स जरूर हैं, ज्योग्राफी में, साइंस में, सोशल स्टडीज में, इस तरह के सब्जेक्ट्स में। तो फिर हमें एक और किक मिली कि क्यों ना पाकिस्तान को ऐसा पहला मुल्क बना दें जहां पे स्कूलों की सतह पे बच्चों को क्लाइमेट चेंज को एजुकेशन के तौर पर पढ़ाया जाता है। और वहां पे हमें इस शर से खैर बरामद होना शुरू हुई, और फिर हमारी पूरी टीम ने काम करना शुरू किया। हम लोगों ने यूनिवर्सिटीज को एंगेज किया, एकेडेमिया को, इंटेलेक्चुअल्स को, सब तक गए। और फिर पाकिस्तान में हमने पहली दफा, हमारे दोस्त ने रिकमेंड किया था कोई करिकुला तैयार होना चाहिए, तो वो करिकुला तैयार भी हो गया। वो करिकुला, उसकी बुक्स भी बन गई, उस करिकुला की टीचर्स गाइड्स भी बन गई, उसकी टीचर्स ट्रेनिंग भी हो गई, और वो साउथ पंजाब में रोल आउट भी हो गया। और साउथ पंजाब में ये खूबसूरत सी सबज किताब, बच्चों की सबज किताब, ये 2 बच्चों की स्टोरी है, गुल और खिजर की, जो 16 स्टोरीज हैं इसके अंदर, 16 चैप्टर्स हैं। हर स्टोरी में वो किसी ना किसी क्लाइमेट चेंज के इशू से इन्हें नबर्द आजमा होना पड़ता है, उसमें से वो गुजरते हैं, और ड्यूरिंग द प्रोसेस उस कंसेप्ट को समझ जाते हैं, और उससे बचने के तरीके भी इन्हें पता चल जाते हैं। तो हमने पूरी शदोमत के साथ साउथ पंजाब में अपनी नेक्स्ट जनरेशन को तैयार करना शुरू कर दिया है। जब हम ये किताब तैयार हुई, बहुत से लोगों की मदद से, बहुत लोगों की इनपुट से, और ये आप जरूर देखिएगा, आपको पसंद आएगी। एक सवाल दिलचस्प निकला, उसके लिए मैं वीडियो भी दिखाना चाहूंगा, अगर आप प्लीज उसको रेडी करवा सकें। वीडियो पे जो लोग बैठे हुए, काइंडली वो हमारी वीडियोस के बाद दिखा दीजिएगा। جب ہم نے یہ کتاب تیار کر لی اور جیسے میں نے آپ کو بتایا یہ بہت کلرفل ہے, سٹوری بکس ہیں, اس کے اندر سٹوریز ہیں یہ, تو ایک کویسچن ارائز کیا کہ اس کا انتصاب بھی کتاب کا ہوتا ہے, تو انتصاب کس کے نام ہوگا؟ ہم نے سوچا قائد اعظم کے نام کر دیتے ہیں, کسی نے کہا کسی انوائرمنٹلسٹ کو ڈھونڈ لیں اس کے نام کر دیں, اس طرح کی ڈفرینٹ ڈسکشنز ہوتی رہیں. لیکن ہم نے اس پہ مزید, چونکہ کتاب پہ بہت محنت ہوئی تھی, اب انتصاب پہ بھی محنت کرنے کا سوچا. اور جب انتصاب کی بات آئی, آپ کو یاد ہوگا جو میری جنریشن اور تھوڑی سی اولڈر جنریشن یہاں پہ بیٹھی ہوئی ہے, ہمارے بچپن میں جگنو ہوا کرتا تھا. انفارچونیٹلی وہ جگنو کہیں نہیں ملتا, اور وہ, یہ روکیے گا بھی جب میں بتاؤں تو ہم نے سوچا کہ ہماری کوتاہیوں کی وجہ سے ہم نے اٹینڈ نہیں کیا اور ہمارے بچے جگنو دیکھنے سے محروم ہو گئے, تو اس جگنو کو واپس لے کے آتے ہیں, اس جگنو کا پیغام بچوں تک لے کے جاتے ہیں. تو یہ جو گرین بک اور یہ جو کلائمیٹ چینج کا سبجیکٹ ہم نے اپنے بچوں کو پڑھانا شروع کیا ہے, اس کا سلوگن بھی یہی ہے کہ ہم جگنو ڈھونڈنے نکلے ہیں, آؤ ہمارے ساتھ چلو. تو انتصاب دیکھتے ہیں, دکھائیے گا ویڈیو دکھائیے گا.
اس جگنو کے نام کہ اپنے بچپن کی رتوں میں, باغوں میں, باغیچوں میں, جسے ہم چمکتا دیکھتے تھے, بڑھ کے مٹھی میں چھپا لیتے تھے, پھر انگلیوں کے دریچوں میں دمکتا دیکھتے تھے. وہ بچپن نہ جانے کہاں ہو گیا, ہمارے رہن سہن نے بھی کچھ ایسی جون بدلی, پھولوں, پتوں, پودوں, پیڑوں سے کچھ ایسی بے اعتنائی برتی کہ وہ جگنو بھی کہیں پنہاں ہو گیا. اب اس بچپن کو, اس جگنو کو ڈھونڈنے نکلے ہیں تو افسوس, صد افسوس, وہ بچپن تو کسی مول نہیں ملتا, کسی طور نہیں ملتا. ہاں, اگر پیڑ پودا اگ جائے تو شاید روٹھا ہوا جگنو لوٹ آئے وہ. یہ باب, یہ کتاب, یہ انتصاب اسی جگنو کے نام.
شکریہ. شکریہ جی.
تھینک یو ویری مچ ڈاکٹر شیام. آپ نے حال میں یقیناً آئی بلیو کہ ناؤ کویشچنز بھی ہوں گے, تو وی کین ٹیک میکسیمم ٹو کویشچنز. یو کین مینشن دا نیم آف پینلسٹ کہ آپ کو کس سے سوال پوچھنا ہے, اینڈ دین وی کم بیک ٹو پینل. یس, اوور ٹو یو سر پلیز. کوئی مائک دے سکتا ہے ان کو؟ یا
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Ikram Ali. I am development practitioner, even belonging to the Sindh affected areas of flood. I congratulate Mr. Suleri and his team for organizing such a pressing panelist on the pressing topic. بہت اچھا ہوا, ہمارے جو ہے نا ہیومینیٹیرین سائٹ سے جو ہے نا ہمیں ایک انڈرسٹینڈنگ ہوئی, کمپریہنشن ہوا کہ کیا سچویشن ہے, کیا فنڈنگ کے حوالے سے. میری گزارش, میری سمپل ایک آبزرویشن یہی ہے کہ میں نے تھوڑا سا پولیٹیکل کانٹیکسٹ بھی دیکھا ہے کہ یہاں جیسے جیلانی صاحب نے بہت اچھی بات کی اور شیرازی صاحب نے, کہ کچھ اس کو نے اوپنلی تو ڈسکلوز نہیں کیا کہ ڈونرز کا اٹینشن ہمیشہ کیپچر کیا جاتا ہے جب آپ کی میڈیا پہ بات چلتی ہے, میڈیاز پہ جو ہے نا افیکٹڈ کی مزریز کو دکھایا جاتا ہے. تو وہ انفارچونیٹلی ہم جو ہے نا تحریک آزادی کو دکھا رہے تھے کہ جو ہمیں ہماری قوم کو جو ہے نا وہ سیو کرے گی, اور جو ہے نا سندھ اور بلوچستان کے پاپولیشن میں یہ ایک پرسیپشن ہے کہ کاش اس قسم کے ڈیزاسٹر کسی جگہ پہ نہ آئے. اگر یہ پنجاب کے کسی اربن ایریا میں آتا تو میڈیا کا جو ہے نا اوپینین ڈفرینٹ ہوتا, اس کی جو ہے نا کوریج زیادہ ہوتی. تو اس نے بیڈلی افیکٹ کیا ہے فنڈ ریزنگ موومنٹ کو, جو ہم نے ایک پولیٹیکل پارٹی کو جو ہے نا 24 گھنٹے لگا کے رکھا کہ جی یہ آزادی لے آئے گا, جو آزادی جو ہے نا ساری کلائمیٹ جسٹس کا. سیکنڈ, جو سر نے بڑی زبردست اسٹوری پیش کی جگنو کے حوالے سے, ابھی میں ریسنٹلی وزٹ کر کے ہم اپنے گاؤں کا, کہ بہت اچھا ہے کہ کریکلم میں اس کو انکارپوریٹ کیا جائے, لوگوں کو کلائمیٹ چینج کے بارے میں معلومات دی جائے. مگر اب میں گاؤں میں اپنے میں گیا ہوں, بچے یہ پوچھ رہے ہیں کہ ان کو نیڈ ہے, ضرورت ہے, سائیکو جو ہے نا سپورٹ کی ضرورت ہے, उनको स्कूल की जरूरत है, शेल्टर की जरूरत है। मैं जुगनू की बात उनको समझाकर कैसे जो है ना इस शेल्टर के इम्पैक्ट से उनको मैं सेव कर सकता हूँ। ये मेरी जो है ना 2-3 ऑब्जर्वेशन थी। थैंक यू वेरी मच।
Ji, thank you very much. My name is Aftab Alam Khan. I am a development consultant and CEO of Resilient Future International. I have a comment and suggestion that protection, the money we spend on protection gives far more return than we spend on relief. While we need to continue work on relief and rehabilitation, we need to remind ourselves that after 6 months, we are going to face another monsoon. I think it's very important to have a protection plan as well. We have seen that despite unprecedented floods, where government or community, they had broad protection measures, they work very well and they increase the resilience. I think that's one point that we keep in mind. Secondly, in terms of government, it's very important to work with government to start the implementation of National Flood Protection Plan. One, we need to work with them that why did it take 10 years to develop National Flood Protection Plan? And before it was implemented, we saw far greater flood than we had in 2010. I think these are 2 requests. Thank you very much.
STPI for holding this excellent panel discussion, and it was wonderful to hear the views of all our worthy panelists. I think each one highlighted, and I think I was noting different things also because, you know, most of the points highlighted by each one of them were very, very pertinent. I think Dr. Farah, when you said that you mentioned who is bearing the cost. So, you know, it's the communities who are bearing the costs, and funding has been small. And I think Shirazi Saab highlighted that, you know, there was not enough media coverage in the beginning. So that was also something that we needed to do. Similarly, I think I was noting everybody's points because they were really good. Then our colleague from Islamic Relief, he was also talking about, you know, that Jilani Saab, yes. Jilani Saab was also mentioning that, you know, they've been shouldering the efforts of the government, and he started looking at the positive side also, that there was collaboration between government and the organizations. Bilal Saab touched upon the issues faced by children, and of course, my colleague, Dr. Itasham, I think it was good you came in at the last, so that was the icing on the cake was your excellent presentation and the video. So I think everyone highlighted these issues very well, and being from the government also, since in EAD we look into donor collaboration and donor funding. I mean, I have to, you know, we have to stay on the positive side. I think looking at the international environment, you know, the international scenario right now with Ukraine crisis going on. So a lot of, you know, our international community's focus has been more towards the Ukraine crisis. So in that sense also, maybe we did not receive as much funding as we would have wanted. But nevertheless, I mean, let me reassure you that they are, you know, they are looking into it. And EAD has been holding, with the government started its efforts immediately. So just when we launched the appeal, this committee was set up, the flood committee, and EAD has a steering committee which meets every week, and it's, you know, the attendance is from different development partners as well as the provincial and federal governments. So we have built this momentum, and of course you saw that you know, for as far as we are concerned, I think it was a very successful COP because this fund was also launched with all Pakistan, all of our efforts. So I think as much as we realize that this thing should not have been repeated, and I totally agree with Ehtisham that we should not waste time. And so the R that was missing, resentment, is something that, you know, after 2010, again, we have this disaster. But nevertheless, I think collaboration is something that always works. And we are very grateful to all our civil society organizations, because government cannot reach each and every place. So I think when they join hands with us and we reach to the communities, that is a huge, huge effort. And we may not get as much funding as we desire, but the funding would be there. And even now, as Secretary EAD mentioned, that we have been repurposing a lot of our other projects also, and we're also getting fresh funding. So inshallah, we look forward to this donor conference also. And I think we need to stay positive, whatever we can get for the country. You know, I think each and every penny matters right now, because we need to save lives, and winter has started, and it is very crucial that not just rehabilitation and reconstruction, but also how we, you know, give them food and shelter and medicines. All these things are very important. And inshallah, you know, we should stay positive that with collaboration of all of you, international partners, as well as INGOs and civil society organizations, we would be able to reach our goals. But and this is an ongoing process, as we all said, you know. And of course, I totally agree with the question that was raised, a comment about protection plan. So this time we are also ensuring that we have proper plans in place so that this does not repeat. And that is why, you know, when this term, you know, this climate justice came, it was because we are not begging for any money. It is because we are not really contributing to this disaster. So the international community has to be aware of this, and they have to contribute to this. So let's hope. We are planning to have this conference in January, and we really hope that we would be able to raise funding for Pakistan, inshallah. So once again, thank you so much. And this was an excellent discussion. Thank you.
Contribute more. हमने अगले सेशन के लिए हाल देना भी है. तो with this, I would request from Gilani साहब last 1 minute का message. पॉलिसी रिकमेंडेशन फ्रॉम ऑल दिस डिस्कशन जो हमारी टीम नोट कर रही है, और अल्टीमेटली STBI जो है वो इसी कॉन्फ्रेंस को, चीज़ों को, रिकमेंडेशन को आगे लेके चलता है. तो मे बी 1 minute और लेस देन 1 minute सब पैनलिस्ट जितने भी हैं 1-1 मिनट में अपना एक मैसेज जो है वो फाइनल मैसेज कन्वे
I'll take 30 seconds, you know. Now, I would really appreciate, you know, one thing when we see on one side is the donor and on one side is the beneficiary. So we are in between. So the donor role is very critical. So I want to appreciate, especially the diaspora, for their continuous generous contribution for this country. Literally sitting outside of Pakistan and anywhere in Europe or any country, they have played a tremendous role. And what we are seeing, the good work, what even Muslim Hands is doing is just because of our diaspora community. So I want to appreciate their efforts, continuous efforts for this country. And secondly, also the donor community. And one thing I want to add into that, you know, we all belong to different faiths, and faith is a big advantage. So I remember in the last, this would be my last sentence. In the last COP, Glasgow 27, I mentioned one thing. So if you see Islam only, half of Islam is climate, is environment, safai, this iman hai. So अगर हम इस स्टेक को लेके जाएं ना और आप फैला दें तो मेरा ख्याल हमारा आधा काम हो जाता. Thank you.
आसिफ भाई, what is the takeaway?
बहुत शुक्रिया. मेरे ख्याल में लास्ट में यही है जो बाकी पैनल्स मेंबर्स ने भी कहा है. ऑफ कोर्स पॉजिटिवनेस है, कौम ने रेजिलियंस जो है वो दिखाई है, और बहुत सारी जगहों पे ऐसे हुआ है कि ह्यूमैनिटेरियन असिस्टेंस नहीं भी पहुंची है, तो जो लोग अपना बिल्ड कर सकते थे, दे आर building back their homes and all this thing, though the speed will be slow, but the nation has a resilience. اور اس میں یہ ہے کہ لیکن جو سب سے امپورٹنٹ چیز ہے وہ ہے کہ مومنٹم رہنا چاہیے ہم لوگوں کی طرف سے ایفرٹس کا, اور ایشو کو جو ہے وہ ہم لوگوں کو الائیو رکھنا چاہیے, کیونکہ آف کورس دیر آر مینی پازیٹیوز بٹ وی شوڈ ریممبر دا پیپل who have to basically survive in these winters, in these harsh winters, and when the 2 million houses have been damaged. And I will echo Javed Gilani sahab, alhamdulillah, maybe the support from diaspora was great, or that made a difference in this response. Of course, the support from Pakistani community and the diaspora community, it made a difference. اور میں یہ ریکویسٹ کروں گا شاید STPI کو اسٹڈی کرے کہ what was the total support that was coming. And so there are hopes inshallah ta'ala, and I hope کہ جس طرح speed اور scale سے مختلف international organizations کام کر رہی ہیں, they will continue inshallah ta'ala.
One takeaway.
Yeah, I think I've already said, but I would also insist that we need to have better urban planning policies also. Sabne kaha कि that is also very important when you're constructing houses, when you're, you know, sort of, so communities need to be sensitized about all these issues. Thank you.
आजकल बड़ा रवाज है बयानिया का, नरेटिव का. So मैं ये चाहूँगा कि आप एक बहुत बेसिक बात थी जो कि इंतहाई अहम थी कौमी जिंदगी के लिए, और वो ये है कि आपको बहैसियत कौम सबसे बड़ा खतरा क्या दरपेश है. इंडिया का नाम ले देंगे, आप टेररिज्म का नाम ले देंगे, ऐसा नहीं है. सबसे बड़ा खतरा मौसमियाती तब्दीली से है, क्लाइमेट चेंज से. तो जब ये सबसे बड़ा खतरा है तो सबको तैयार करना पड़ेगा, पूरी कौम को, बच्चों को, बड़ों को, सबको. और जैसे मैंने अर्ज किया, हम ये करना छोड़ दें कि वेस्ट हमेशा लीड ले और हम फॉलो करें. चलें हम कुछ ऐसा करते हैं कि पाकिस्तान में वो बात शुरू हो और दुनिया उसको कॉपी करे. शुक्रिया.
डॉक्टर फरह.
जी, 3 चीजें कहना चाहूंगी. हम जैसे बात हुई प्रोटेक्शन, मुझे उससे यही समझ आया कि हम बचा सकें अपने आप को ऐसी चीज़ों से. तो हम हमारे यहाँ ह्यूमैनिटेरियन और डेवलपमेंट सेक्टर में हम अपनी टर्मिनोलॉजी इस्तेमाल करते हैं. तो हम कहते हैं कि हम क्लाइमेट रेजिलिएंट तरीके से हमने बिल्ड बैक करना है. सो इट्स रियली इम्पॉर्टेंट दैट वी बिल्ड बैक इन अ क्लाइमेट रेजिलिएंट वे. इसी से जुड़ा दूसरा पॉइंट मेरा ये है कि इट कैन ओनली हैपन जब लोकल लेवल पे हमारी गवर्नेंस स्ट्रांग होगी, क्योंकि यहाँ बैठकर हम बहुत सारे प्लान्स बना सकते हैं, लेकिन ये इश्यूज जिनको फेस हो रहे हैं उनकी पार्टिसिपेशन इन प्लान्स के अंदर और उनकी पार्टिसिपेशन इनकी इम्प्लीमेंटेशन के अंदर बहुत ज़्यादा ज़रूरी है. तो हमें फर्ज करें कम्युनिटीज़ के पास अर्ली वार्निंग सिस्टम्स होने चाहिए, एक्सेस टू इंफॉर्मेशन होनी चाहिए. अगर हम चाहते हैं कि सब डिस्ट्रिक्ट लेवल पर डिज़ास्टर मैनेजमेंट कमिटीज़ हो, तो ये सारी चीज़ें लोकल लेवल पर होने वाली हैं. तो लोकल गवर्नेंस मेरा ख्याल है बहुत ज़्यादा ज़रूरी है. तीसरी चीज़ मैं ये कहना चाहूँगी कि ये बिल्डिंग बैक जो है, इसके लिए हमें सारे सब चाहिए, सब एवरीबडी नीड्स टू बी, वी नीड ऑल हैंड्स ऑन डेक. क्योंकि इसका लाइक वी हैव टॉक्ड अबाउट इट बिफोर, स्केल बहुत ज़्यादा बड़ा है. तो ये बात पहले भी हो चुकी है. तमाम इंटरनेशनल NGOs, हमारे नेशनल पार्टनर्स, हम मौजूद हैं, कम्युनिटीज़ के साथ काम कर रहे हैं. तो हमारी आपस की कोलैबोरेशन, पार्टनरशिप, नई पार्टनरशिप्स, नई सोच और सॉल्यूशंस जो कि लोकल सॉल्यूशंस हो, उनको इम्प्लीमेंट करने की ज़रूरत है. थैंक यू.
बिलाल.
So very quickly, just building on what Farah said on collaboration or partnership wala element. So we have the EED representative here, and we closely work with MOI as well. Things are happening on the ground, and it's only possible when we are working together, being its community, being its local organizations, civil society actors, or international organizations. And there were some very positive when it comes to coordinations, jo ki hamare colleagues ne mentioned bhi kiya. There were some very good initiatives from the government of Pakistan that has helped us to work together. So when we are talking about policy reconsideration or policy making, I think we should need to look into those initiatives, because we would need some continuity of those initiatives going forward as well, particularly when we are going into towards the recovery and rehabilitation phase. So that's very important, and I would like that to be considered in the policy.
Thank you so much, everyone. आप सबका सुनने का शुक्रिया. Hopefully, discussion went fruitful. Or at the end, I especially thank STPI, the one largest think tank in Pakistan, and I can tell this is the 25th conference, annual conference, silver jubilee है. और सारे जो audience हैं, आपसे भी मैं कहूँगा कि there are number of sessions in different hall. You can see outside the sessions already. I hope you have registered. So please benefit from this network, only available in Pakistan, who is contributing a lot. And the cooperation must not end with this event. I think this is something great initiated by STPI, inviting the international NGO community. So PHF has a representative body of 5 NGOs. We assure that we will take forward this commitment with STPI to encourage the STPI team that we will partner to come up with more evidence-based knowledge to support the government of Pakistan in the policy making and implementation to cope up with the challenges, including climate change. So at the end, thank you very much, everyone, for coming. And then we can have a final group photo for the STPI publication, and then you have the refreshment outside, tea, and you can have informal chit chat and gupshup with the panelists as well. Thank you, everyone.